welcome everybody to another edition of Safety View. And today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're kicking off a session called Meet the Author. And we've got our first author joining us today, Clive Lloyd. And we're really glad to have you here. Rosa, why don't you kick us off a little bit?
Oh, thank you. Well, Clive and I have been communicating quite a bit over the last year because we both have very similar thoughts and thinking about the importance of trust and psychological safety and caring and how that affects safety performance. And so, Clive, I'm wondering in regards to your book, which you can introduce the next generation of safety leadership, when were you first started thinking about the importance of trust and psychological safety? Because that was not really mainstream not too long ago.
No. Yeah, great question. By the way, it's lovely to see you again, Rosa. And everybody I've seen so far, I think I've only met one of you in person, and that is Tim. But I've met everybody, of course, on LinkedIn many times. So it's like I feel I know you guys anyway. But anyway, it's nice to meet you. I've been talking about trust, Rosa, for at least 14, 15 years. I've been using the term psychological safety. In fact, our website, even if you go back a decade, had the home of psychological safety as one of the banners underneath. That was before it was really a thing. I mean, it's been in the literature for decades, actually. But of course, it rose to the term psychological safety really rose to prominence a couple of years ago with Amy Edmondson's work. And the whole thing about psychological safety for me and trust really was because I'd been working in the mining industry, but often, well, a very different context. I had no interest in safety. I didn't know much about safety going back nearly 20 years ago, but I was there because I've got a clinical background in psychology. I was there doing grief counselling often after a fatality or a major injury on site. And the more time I spent on mines and oil and gas plants, the more I discovered they used to do a lot of that humanistic stuff after a fatality or after a major incident. But when I looked at the overall operations and how people were led and safety in general, it seemed so far from humanism that it's not funny. It was all sort of radical behaviorism, and it was ticks in boxes and compliance driven. And so that led me down a research thread, I guess, to actually see what works, because I don't talk about trust and psychological safety really because they're nice. I'm an evidence-based creature. I'm a pragmatist. I believe in doing what works. And the more I looked into it, if there's a bigger predictor of safety performance and trust, I'm yet to find it. And so, yeah, I've been talking about it for well over a decade.
Wow, that's amazing. So you feel that is a great predictor, but so often people have trouble selling that to management because they ask about the numbers.
Yeah.
Like, where's the cause and effect?
Yeah. I think you're right. And I think, to be fair, and without wishing to stereotype too badly, but many of the senior leaders in mining here in Australia, at least, and oil and gas construction tend to have engineering backgrounds. And so it's unsurprising then that all this sort of, what we call them soft skills, that misleading descriptor of soft skills, is not something up front for them. They want tangible stuff, and I get that. I understand they want numbers, and if we do this, will it reduce numbers and by how much? And so trust and psychological safety has not necessarily been big on the agenda. I think it would be, everybody understands it would be good if our team trust us and so forth, but it's never been something that's been driven or put actually at the top of the pile for a while to actually build that level of psychological safety. And I fully understand why it's not. And I think, to be fair, psychology and other related disciplines involved in safety, we haven't been particularly good at providing them with the why. This is why we need to do it. This is what the research says. And to be fair, they need a why.
Yeah. And to be also fair is, do you notice that though over the generations, Clives, the perception of how to do business has changed a lot, and maybe that might have a lot to be why they're so hesitant, because they come from a different era? How is that impacting the changes going on?
Look, things are evolving. I certainly think that just the whole notion, the move towards say safety differently or safety two, whatever terminology you want to use. I think that is an indicator that progress is being made. The fact that that stuff is quite widely known now, it just suggests that we've moved quite away from the traditional, or what Eric would call safety one. Although it's interesting, Tamara, I was in South Australia this week, and there's a couple of guys who I do know from LinkedIn, senior leaders, and they said, Clive, I've got to tell you, and this might be of interest to you guys, I'm not sure if this fits you too, but he said, I'm on LinkedIn, but he said, you guys kind of live in a bit of a bubble there. And he said, you all discuss things like safety differently, safety two versus safety one, HOP, resilience engineering. And he said, I've got to tell you, mate, the vast majority of safety managers, safety advisors, safety people don't even know what they are.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
I think he's right, actually. I think most safety people still have not heard of those terms. And that's part of why in the book I don't talk a lot about it. I leave it till the very last chapter to even introduce what safety differently is about. Because what I aimed the book very carefully. I was not interested in writing a book for academics or other consultants or commentators or theorists. And when you think about it, if I was trying to write a book to get the agreement between people like Sidney Decker, Dr. Rob Long, Dominic Cooper, David Provan, I wouldn't write a word because the varied opinions are too strong and they're all over the place. I wrote the book not for those people at all. I wrote it for safety people, for leaders, for people. And yeah, a lot of them haven't heard of those new terms. So it's almost like I wanted first up to provide the why.
Okay.
This is why it's worth it. Yeah, a
It's
look
not
at
really
doing it differently.
The term, right? It's not the term, it's the why.
It's not the term.
So along those lines, you said that I asked you to pick something out of your book that you would like to read,
Sure.
because this is a Meet the Author.
Mm-hmm.
And it's customary to do a reading, to have the author do a reading, and then take questions from the audience. So I hope Linda and Tim and Brett, I hope, and John, I hope you feel free to, there's only a few of us, so you can unmute yourselves if you're in a quiet room and feel free to join in.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Clive.
Yeah, so look, when I was thinking, well, what should I read? I didn't know. I actually wanted to read Tim's forward out, but that seemed a bit odd that I'd be reading somebody else's stuff out because it's such a great forward. It just sort of really sets the book up well. But I've picked this bit because maybe the links to safety are not quite so direct, maybe not quite so obvious. And so maybe I thought we could discuss something after that. And we were discussing a few political issues earlier. Maybe there's some overlap, but see what you think. I'll just take from this. While we remain aloof and keep our emotional distance from others, it's all too easy to judge and condemn those who appear different from us. It seems to me of late that political expediency is often served by focusing on the often confected differences between groups of people, with a toxic and self-serving goal of amplifying fear and disdain of them by us. History is replete with dictators who've employed inflammatory orations to tap into people's inherent prejudice for their own political or ideological gain. Understanding someone's story can provide us with the empathy and compassion required to see through such noxious rhetoric and to break down unhelpful assumptions and stereotypes. So, just a little paragraph.
You know, Rosa, I like that, and it reminds me of a story that you shared also about understanding stories and breaking down, our biases.
Yeah.
I think that's important because a lot of people, Clive, they're not doing that. Can you expand on those?
Yeah, I was chatting offline with Rosa about this earlier, and we were talking about this notion of authenticity. It is so easy to judge very, very quickly. In fact, that's what our brains are wired to do as a protective measure too. What I've discovered over the years is we all, to a degree, wear masks, psychological masks, and for good reason, often to protect ourselves. If we feel discomfort or anxiety, we do it at work, we do it away from work, and so forth. And for me, that is quite natural. It's just that some people, some psychopaths and some narcissists, actually deliberately will take those natural prejudices, therefore, that we all have, and seek to actually amplify them, to build them up for their own purposes. for me, the way we start to get past that as leaders is the more our people understand who we are as leaders, the more likely it is that, you know, we're letting them in. More than that, though, the more we can understand other people's stories, we can start to break down those stereotypes that we have. And I've just seen this as almost an express route to creating trust. In the clinics I used to run back in my clinical days, we used to do that as a matter of course and quite regularly. And that is, we'd call it the red cushion thing. And literally somebody would share their life story to whatever degree they felt comfortable, of course. And I did share actually a story in the book, and it kicks off the story, the chapter on what's your story. And that was my recollection of Phil, or somebody I named Phil, who I just could not stand. It seemed every word that came out of his mouth I treated with disdain, because he seemed angry, sneering. He'd put all the other staff members down. He would suck up to management and so forth. And it was his turn to share his story. And as I write in the book, he shared just a little bit of his childhood. And I won't go into the whole thing now, but within 10 minutes of authentic sharing, it was really easier to understand why he was like that, why he wore those particular masks for protection. And even though we were never great friends, at least I could understand where he's coming from. There's nothing quite like understanding where somebody's come from. We've all walked through different parks. We've knelt at different graves. We've all got different stories, and they actually create who we are, and whether or not and to what degree we need to wear masks at work, at home, around other people. I reckon we've all experienced maybe a week at work, tough one. And then we sit down with people that we know really well, family or friends. We sit down for a beer or a coffee, and it's almost like you just feel it letting go. And now I can be who I am. And isn't that a joy when we just have that feeling? Now I can just not pretend anymore. I can just be who I am, knowing that these people, they're fine with that. Mm-hmm. And why can we do that? Because we trust those people. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think also as safety professionals, part of what we can be bringing into the workplace is that gift to help other management employees also go through that. It reminds me of a situation where I had to be mediating between two people. And there was one individual who was always very bitter and nasty to people. And we had this mediation meeting. And the first thing out of the manager's mouth between the two people is, I know you don't like each other. And I just kind of put an end to that. And I said, you know what, let's turn this around. Can you each start sharing some things about each other that you do like? And it was very interesting how when you took that dynamic of getting them to kind of share what they had actually noticed, the other one does positively, where they didn't become best friends, I'm not saying that, but they had more tolerance for one another in the workplace. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts around that? And how do you address the, learning to share being tolerant of one another in your book, Clive?
Yeah, and look, some things in the workplace are just simply not okay. It is. If you're on my team, it is never okay to cut somebody down, to put them down. So very quickly, there's boundaries in place where we need a conversation, because we need to look after each other. But again, I don't like to give up on people. If there's a leader who I believe is not performing very well interpersonally, I really don't like to give up on people. It's very rare that I would. By the way, I think the easiest way to get great people on your team is at the recruitment phase. You can save yourself a lot of problems later on. I unashamedly will use psychometric testing for that. It just helps you at least screen out blatant psychopaths and narcissists, although I've worked for a few psychopaths in my time. Not for very long, it's not very nice. But again, I don't like to give up on people. I like to give them the benefit of the doubt. And look, if people do things for a reason, and if a person is brusque, if they like the old command control finger pointing style of leadership, often that is because they've learned that there's a payoff in that they've learned that leadership is about exercising power and so forth.
They've been rewarded.
And to be
right?
fair,
Mm-hmm.
they're rewarded for it.
They're rewarded.
And so they need
the boss.
Yeah, they need a payoff.
Yeah.
Why would they change, Rosa? If there's a payoff in it, we've got to help them to understand you can still get a payoff, but there's different ways to get that. Again, the old cliche, if the only tool you've got is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail, right? You just whack it. What we need to be able to do is to give our leaders more tools. And if they've seen that they can actually get better results by using different tools, that's terrific. To be fair, though, people do those things for different reasons. With many leaders that I work with, it is just a lack of skill. They just have never learnt those particular people skills. And we see this widely here. I won't say just in Australia, but I think particularly in Australia, because we've got a bit of a macho culture, if we're honest. And many times in mining and oil and gas and construction utilities, people were put in a supervisor role, not necessarily because they were great with people. They were put in that role because they were great on the tools. You know, they were great operators. Mm-hmm. And so what management now imagines is, because I've now said you're a supervisor, that somehow these people magically have, through osmosis, perhaps gained these people skills, and we put them in front of a toolbox talk or a start of shift meeting, expecting they can now, you know, create engagement. And many can't, because they simply lack the skills. So for managers, the least we can do with people we put in a leadership role is provide them with at least a basic set of skills to be able to do that. So very often it's a skill based. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's more of a character, a personality style. That's a little bit more challenging. That takes some deeper work. But again, even if my character is one that's more towards hostile, again, understanding their story, understanding that through coaching, I think this is where coaching comes in. And then very rarely, you just find a psychopath.
Clive, if you're a safety professional and you're working for somebody like that, I hear from them so often that it's abusive and exhausting to always be trying to understand the other person and trying to turn the relationship around when it's never reciprocated. So I'm sure you've been in that position too, right? Yeah. So I want to add something, because I'd love for you to address this or anyone else in our group. Tamara and I did a class for up and coming safety professionals, juniors and seniors at the university. We spoke for 1 hour, and that's the extent of their people skills education in 4 years. So that's a problem right there. And it's the same thing with the MBAs. So these skills are not being taught. Linda, did you ever receive any education in that area yourself?
No, you're right. These skills just aren't being taught. So I guess in terms of a question for you, Clive, for people who are emerging professionals, what would, I guess, your piece of advice be for them, or something that you took years to learn? What is something that you address in the book to tell people it took years to learn this, like how to build trust? What actions, or again, piece of advice do you give people in those situations? Yeah,
it's a great question. And I agree. I don't think the safety curriculum, let alone the leadership curriculum, does include enough on basic engagement skills and basic people skills. In the book, I tried to be, it's limited obviously because it's a little book, practical things that people can start doing. And a big one in the book is language, just the language that we use, and moving away from what I describe in the book as parent language, which is still common in management. You should, you must, you ought to, you have to, all of those words. And moving towards just different ways of and questions, language and questions. Just by shifting our language from parent-child to adult can make a huge difference. Moving from questions that, questions are so important. A question actually switches on our conscious brain, so we can literally steer attention through the types of questions that we ask. So when we're asking traditional safety questions like, why did you do it like that? Which infers something. Who is to blame? People's attention is steered towards fear, away from trust, as opposed to, and again, this has some tie-ins with the new view. What's one thing we can do to move forward? What are we going to learn from this? What will we do differently next time? All of those questions steer people's attention to solution focus, engagement, teamwork. And so there's quite a bit in the book about how to actually just change the words that you use, become more conscious about our language. That alone can have a major impact.
You know, Clive, you said before that you would love to read a little bit of Tim's foreword, and I'm now intrigued about what you wanted to read. But also,
Yeah.
I'd like to invite Tim on to speak
Yeah.
about what prompted you to write the foreword that he's going to read a little bit for. So please come and join us, Tim. Clive, go ahead.
You want me to read forward? I was going to say, wouldn't it be great if Tim had a book handy and he could read it, but where is Tim?
I didn't want to put him on the spot, but he did. Okay. All right. You know what, Tim? You're in the hot seat now. Take
No,
it away.
Tim may not have a book handy. I don't know.
Okay. Isn't that it?
Yeah, that's it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Where is
Take
Tim?
it. Yeah. Go ahead, Tim. You can take it away now.
Sure. How much of it would you like me to read? Just to fit the first part?
Whole thing, man.
Oh, okay. Here we go. Safety as industry is in crisis. For reasons that escape me, Australia seems to be clinging to outdated, culture-eroding, fear-driven traditional safety models and theories that we just can't seem to shake. We've trivialised what it means to be safe, adopting punitive approaches to safety built on weak foundations of words on paper, tick and flick exercises, PPE, and catching someone doing something wrong. And the scary thing is the majority of managers, people leaders, and even safety professionals I come across genuinely believe this approach is the right one. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if I want to remain part of something that just doesn't seem capable of changing for the better. But then I shake it off by reminding myself of why I started in the field of safety in the first place, taking inspiration from some of the great people affecting positive change like Clive. You might be thinking this all sounds a little grim, quite a negative tone to open with, and you'd be right, it is. But I'm an honest person, and I've learned that the best way to approach a challenge is to stare into the brutal facts in order to establish exactly what it is that I'm trying to fix. Yes, I believe that safety as an industry is in crisis, but I also believe there are still opportunities to drag our outdated notions of safety management into the modern era. And here's how I'm going about it, employer by employer, assignment by assignment. After all, you can only eat an elephant one bite at a time. I didn't really know what that meant when I wrote it, but now I do. We need to move away from KPIs and towards a state where we embrace the human condition and recognise its positive contribution to safety. We need to get better at harnessing human potential to see people as the solution, not the problem. After all, human error is not the cause, it's a symptom of something much bigger. And in Clive's words, behaviours are not the problem, they are an expression of the problem. We should be looking to high reliability organisations for inspiration on how to create states of collective mindfulness and how to build resilience and therefore capability. We should be sharing with our leaders and managers the great conversations that are being had in progressive safety forums around concepts such as safety to and safety differently, or even better, dragging our leaders along to these forums and engage and be engaged directly. We need to recognise trust as the key predictor of mature safety cultures, build psychologically safe workplaces where positive safety interventions are embedded as blueprints in our subconscious library, and view our employees as customers of our safety programs. We need to engage with the workforce and listen to learn, not listen to respond. Many of the problems we are trying to address are due to our inability to listen. And perhaps most importantly, we need to be outwardly curious, empower ourselves and others to share stories about safety and learn from each other. Because I'm certain that someone out there has faced the same safety challenges I am facing and found effective ways to overcome them. Safety as an industry is in crisis. Beginning the shift from compliance to care through next generation safety leadership, as outlined here by Clive, may just provide some answers to questions that not enough of us are asking.
Thank you, Tim.
Not a problem. I guess to follow that, what prompted me to write a foreword like that was that I was frustrated, obviously, I think that tone comes through, but as a safety leader, and as a safety leader, I was frustrated from going to organisation and being put up against the same roadblocks and this perception that a paternalistic approach to safety is the only way to do things. I was equally frustrated that the breakthrough that I was being sold was behavioural-based safety, and I just didn't agree with it. So when I first went to one of Clive's workshops in Sydney, must have been in 2012 or something, and I listened to day one, the content of what Clive was talking about, that was just refreshing for me. For me, it was the renewal I need, and it just provided me with hope that there's a way forward out of this. And this is well before Safety 2 came across my desk anyway. Safety Differently was yet to be born. Clive was talking about trust-based cultures. He was undoing behaviouralism, which was just not heard of. And afterwards, I had a chat with Clive and just sort of asked about how some experiences or case studies of where this has been implemented. And I guess I was trying to gauge whether I could sort of bring this into the organisation I was with at the time. And it turns out I could. So Clive helped me with that. All of a sudden, I started to build a bit more confidence. Then I moved to the next organisation and started it all again. Started off frustrated, build some confidence and capability, and it kept going like that. So I guess the foreword for me is, yes, I'm frustrated at this Safety 1 approach that we keep on trying to we keep embedding, but still, every organisation I work for, it may start like that, but it finishes with a lot more hope. So I'm balancing a line between a frustrated approach to safety, but then still the light at the end of the tunnel.
Mm-hmm. And what about your own maturity, Tim? Because I have found that in myself, that I have had to change a lot and learn a lot to begin being heard. Because when I was younger, I felt a lot of times that I was being dismissed, overlooked. And it took a lot of development on my self-esteem, on my, what shall I say, my conviction. But I think the biggest thing for me, which is why I wrote The Relationship Factor in Safety Leadership, was that I realized that I had to build these connections upwards, with the managers as well as peers, and because I was always really good with employees, but going up and sideways can sometimes be more difficult. Was that true for you? Did you find that you consciously had to do some personal development?
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely relate to the ability to influence laterally and downwards with these concepts around trust-based culture, but it was so difficult to influence up because I guess I would have an opportunity at either a safety leadership team or an exec meeting. I might have the floor for 5 to 10 minutes to talk about some pretty heavy concepts, and it's just not enough time. So yeah, that made me look inside myself and try to figure out different ways around that. And the answer was actually right in front of me. The ability to build from the ground and laterally and get the momentum at that level would take the leadership group along for the ride. It took me quite a while to learn that. And again, the whole concept of Safety 2, I think is sort of built around that. So organically that started happening, and I still do have difficulty influencing up because there's just not enough time with execs, with the organisations I've worked for, to get them as a captive audience. But once that momentum's built from the ground up, they're forced to listen and come along for the ride or get left behind. So for me, that was really a really interesting insight into myself.
I wanted to invite James and Brett in also, and I'm curious if either of you had any questions or comments that you wanted to share.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'd love to ask a question of the group. And so firstly, Clive, the part of the book that you chose to read, I think was salient in the sense that we all struggle with this tension between wanting to be in a group to get things done, but not wanting to isolate ourselves and create the tension with other groups. And for example, we see that in the Safety 2 domain, where there's a sort of Safety 2 versus Safety 1 tension. And I've noticed a few authors. I've noticed Dave Proven, for example, talks to not isolating ourselves and embracing and understanding why some safety one people think the way they do. So that's my comment. But my question to the group, and forgive the long-winded nature of this, Clive, I think I flagged this with you one stage on LinkedIn. I'm a big fan of your book. I loved it. I love that it's short too, by the way.
Yeah, a lot of people have said that. Yeah.
Because it's digestible, you know, so that's a real plus. The chapter on organizational values, trying to tie that together with, you know, the what I've read from Rosa and what I've read of Sidney Dekker and what I've read of Edgar Schein, and I'm really interested in this concept, and I'm interested to ask the group their thoughts, because there's this real conventional wisdom that we need to isolate our core values and then use them as guidance. But when I read Edgar Schein, what I see is he talks also a lot about the hidden assumptions and the non-conscious values that we all bring to the table because of the macro cultures. And when I see companies specifying their core values, I read the 4 or 5 of them and I think, but there is a multiplicity of other values that are influencing our decision-making at any one time. And it seems overly simplistic to tie ourselves to those 4 or 5 that were identified probably in a brainstorm in 30 minutes in a boardroom.
That's right.
Somewhere. And I'm just curious what other people think about that tension. Yourself and others.
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you for that, James. It's a great point you raise. And I would love to hear, because I'm guessing everybody here who works for an organisation, that organisation would have a set of values. So I'm really curious to see what you guys think. For me, James, let me just say this, and this might sound a bit odd. Most of the time, I wish companies didn't have a set of espoused values. I wish they wouldn't bother. And the reason I say that is because 98% of the time, they are things that adorn a website or a poster, and they are certainly not used in any meaningful way. In fact, I do this as a little test sometimes. It's a bit naughty of me, but sometimes when I've got a group of senior leaders together, I will say, gentlemen, what are your company values? And it's not unusual for them to all look at each other, and sometimes they'll have a guess because they're pretty safe with things like integrity, right? And they tend to be platitudes. They tend to be just lame platitudes that we've kind of got to have them because everybody else has them, but they are not used in any meaningful way. And I give the example in the book, you know, of Boeing, who've got that wonderful list of values that clearly did not steer their behaviours towards the 737 MAX. You've got Volkswagen who've done very similar things. And when companies are just espoused rather than in use, here's the danger for me. That enables the workforce to become incredibly cynical. When the senior leader stands up the front and does the State of the Nation address and says, don't forget, guys, our values are blah, 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 and the workforce is sitting there rolling their eyes. You are better off not having any. I honestly believe it can be that if you've got a set of values where they are specifically used to guide behaviours, that can be useful. But of course, that's a limited set. There's just 1 or 2 things leaders, I think, need to make sure they actually address in their decision making, whether you call that a set of values or not. I just prefer most organisations not to bang on about values unless they are actually going to be used meaningfully somehow. So that's just my take. Love to hear what others think.
I could add something there as well, everyone, that I totally agree with what you were saying there, Clive, that I advise clients that I work with not to have their values, don't articulate them, don't put them down on paper, but let people decide for themselves. You know, their workforce should be really clear what's valued in the organisation simply by the actions and by the leadership practices that they're seeing. And one of the things for me is I go back to my time. The first part of my career was in the army, and half of that time was in the SAS regiment. So 6 years in the SAS, and the SAS doesn't have their values written up on a piece of paper, but everybody there knows them. And you know, they've got problems at the moment, or they're struggling in that they haven't really been living their values with guys in Afghanistan. And there's investigations ongoing, but which for older guys like me, that blew my mind when I saw that, how much they could stray from good practice and what it was. But that's very similar to the Australian cricket team and what they did 2 years ago in 2018 with cheating and ball tampering. For the people that don't know, what the Australian cricket team did was took sandpaper to the one side of the cricket ball in a game in South Africa, a test, so that they could get more spin on the ball. So they rough up one side, have the other side smooth, so when the bowlers bowl it, they can get the ball to curve and make it harder to hit. So a curved ball in baseball equivalent. And and I write in my book that I'm still drafting, or still in draft, but Justin Langer, the coach of the Australian cricket team, or the guy who took over as coach, you know, what he did with the team to turn it around, and he's done an amazing job. But what he said to the team was, what we need to do, guys, is just be good blokes, be good people. And the Australian cricket team had a really bad name for really berating, I'm just trying to remember the word that he used, because it was banter, not
sledging.
Yeah, it started with B though, but it's the equivalent of sledging. So what they do with the other team is just to try to psychologically rattle them by really getting in their heads with really negative comments. And his what he agreed with the team, you know, what they call their foundation, was to not do that. Just be good blokes. Have a lot of banter, but not sledge the other team. And it drove their values and their behaviour right across the board. And I've certainly seen that in the best organisations. The leaders do that, where they don't need to write down on paper who they are and what they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. And I think that telling someone what their values are just doesn't work. It's never going to work. And for me personally, I guess my success in my roles as a safety leader come down to my values. And I'm happy with my values, and I take my values from one organisation to another. And when I'm recruiting or interviewing for team members, I completely respect their values and the values they bring. So I've got this real bugbear about organisations employing good people and then telling good people what their values are going to be. It's just a recipe for disaster.
Now, I did get in the chat that John had some insights he wanted to share in a question. John, do you want to come on mic?
Yeah, I'm just on now. I'm sorry I'm a bit dark, guys. I'm in a cafe in Brooklyn on the Hawkesbury River, so I'm just travelling on holiday just now. So, Clive, I think one of the things I really got from your book was, you know, it's feeling like a bit of frustration. I think that we're still here, we're still having these conversations. I've been in the workforce now for dare I say it, 37 years in various jobs over the years. Started off as an electrician. Now, for me, you know, there was a trial and error. You know, you learn through failure and the odd box in the back of the head. And the people you worked with as an apprentice critically taught you the social skills you needed to negotiate through the workplace. Now, going back to the comment you said about things like the NDAs and you know, do we have to then start looking at how we introduce soft skills, how we introduce conversations, difficult conversations, relationships, trust into curricula of how we bring up the next generation of safety leaders, and what are we doing to actively support them as the, if you like, the elder statespeople of the industry? What are we actually proactively doing to create that support base and that skill set to bring people on. They're technically astute. They're absolutely brilliant. They're going to get into a technology world that we can't even imagine yet in 10 or 20 years' time. Work is going to change because work has to change. But what are we going to do with these guys to give them, that extra bit of, I had a 4-year apprenticeship. You can do we're not doing the apprenticeships anymore.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Mate, I missed little bits because it's quite a noisy cafe there and it was sort of coming through your mic. So let me just say this about John. If ever you want somebody to write a really good review for your book, John is just an amazing writer and he just put this whole review together, which is brilliant. I've also got envy issues in that I happen to know from what John has just said, he's in the Hunter Valley of Australia, which is the most beautiful wine region, and I'm sure he's going to have a fantastic weekend. That aside, John, it's a great point. And we did touched on this earlier, the safety curriculum, or even to a degree, just the leadership curriculum, I believe, and it sounds like you're aligned here, does not spend anywhere near enough time. We still tend to recruit based on technical skills. And I think that alone needs to change. Don't get me wrong, I'm not downplaying the importance of technical skills. We absolutely need both. However, we can teach technical skills. It's a lot. We can teach interpersonal skills too, but it's sort of good to hire for character, I think. What interested me and what I included in the epilogue of the book was what the ACRE framework have been looking at. And if you haven't come across the ACRE frameworks, they're actually quite a large group of safety professionals, very senior professionals. And there's a few surveys they've done. I think it's 96, senior health and safety professionals, 20 different sectors. So there's a wide variety here. And in one of the polls there, they found, I think it was like 86% or something actually labelled non-technical skills as the most important thing for leaders of the future, the next generation of leaders to focus on. And the advisory panel actually put forward the following attributes as key for the next generation of safety leaders, John. So this is where we believe safety professionals kind of should be heading. To be constant questioners rather than knowers. To become masters of emotional and relational intelligence rather than merely technical expertise. To inspire others to find a sense of purpose in the work they do and create intrinsic motivation rather than offer purely extrinsic rewards, to reveal unseen opportunities and challenges by embracing uncertainty and vulnerability, rather than attempting to engage or steer humanity out of work processes, to be a servant leader, rather than a figure of authority in a hierarchical relationship, and to listen loudly and coach rather than command and control. So the recognition is there, John. You're not alone in this, and Tim's frustration from earlier and my own from time to time. It's recognised, it's widely recognised. Yep.
So for our listeners, so that they can actually get some tangible takeaways, can you share some insights and recommendations about what safety professionals can be doing in their workplaces when they are, how can they be providing support to the next generation of safety professionals? So what's your insights on that?
Well, insight number one, read my book and read Rose's book. That'll get you going. And possibly share a copy with your aspiring leaders. We actually did this last week. I was in South Australia working with the company, and we just got together. The senior leaders had read it, and they'd actually done the reflection questions, and they just shared the reflection questions or their findings with each other. And what they're doing now is they're just going to actually get their, the frontline guys to do exactly the same thing. But that's, obviously that's going to be a lot more to offer than I can do in a few minutes response here. But again, just emphasizing to them that it's not all about technical skills. I know Brett and Rosa very interested in this notion of socio-technical safety. And I think that's something we really need to keep looking at in depth now. That is, sure, we need our technical skills. We need our people to be technically skilled. That will only go so far. We need to start bringing our people in to understanding that if you want people to engage with the technical, if we want them to use processes and systems as intended, we need to actually create psychological safety and trust. That is a new skill set for many. That is to actually the skills required to bring our people in, to engage our people, that is a whole bunch of skills. So for the next generation, absolutely pursue your technical education.
You know what?
Do whatever you can.
What just struck me, Clive, is that most of us never experienced that in our education: psychological safety and trust. We're graded. We were competing. You know, teachers often ridiculed you if you didn't know the answer and were wrong. So we grew up in that atmosphere, and so then all of a sudden we're saying, "Oh, but you can't be that way as a boss." So
yeah,
it seems like there has to be a what do you call it when you have to shed? You have a time of shedding those beliefs and those experiences so that you can make room for this new way of thinking. And if we don't start, I'm working with 12-year-olds, or I was before COVID, on socio-emotional skills, because though the socio-emotional skills are prized in the workplace. They said, you know, if people don't have good analytical skills and good social-emotional skills, they don't function well in our organization. So since that is coming into being in our schools, I think that could bode well for our universities and then the new professionals that are coming in to already have that background.
It's interesting. I find it very intriguing because one fact that not everybody knows about me is I'm actually from a social work background. So I have a bachelor's of social work. So when I first came into safety, I didn't understand why the other safety professionals are so distant and disassociated. It really didn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
So it's interesting now that I'm in the community and listening to what people are being educated in the school throughout. When I was in social work, learning social work, and you guys were in learning occupational health and safety. So I wonder why they don't have that part of learning about group dynamics, etc., and soft skills in safety. And I wanted to bring also into the conversation, Tim, you had a question that you wanted to bring in?
Yeah, I know that in Australia, at least anyway, there's a strong focus on KPIs and compliance levels and injury frequency rates and that sort of thing, which is frustrating in itself. But if compliance levels and injuries are the byproduct of a safety culture, does anyone on the panel have good examples of how they've been able to shift that focus from KPIs to culture at the senior level?
Yeah, I could probably add one point there, everyone. In my work, I talk about relationship, which both Clive and Rosa do as well, really focus on, and we're completely aligned on that. But so I use an acronym of CARES, and I say a leader's, or came out of our research, leader's task is to create an achievement-oriented, relationship-based endeavour so that it's sustainable. That's CARES. But the achievement orientation part of it, work that I've done, and more in the last few years, we identified almost 20 years ago, the achievement part of it really tied in with, is anybody or people would have read Daniel Pink's work on Drive with autonomy, mastery and purpose? Well, we've been able to map in the achievement orientation part, the best teams that we researched absolutely did those things. Out of 20 factors that we identified through multiple regression analysis, there was 14 in achievement, and they split pretty well through those three areas of autonomy, mastery and purpose. So the best leaders create an achievement orientation by focusing on those three things. The worst leaders used level 1 motivation, fear of sacking people, or carrot and stick level 2. And you know it's not sustainable when you motivate people with level 2, but the mastery part, and I now really focus on that, and I'm just curious to see what people think. That there's two orientations you can have: a mastery orientation or a performance orientation. a performance orientation gets you Boeing 737 MAX, or we're going to be beat to the market by Airbus, who's bringing out a new aircraft. We've got to be more agile, leaner, and more responsive, get our aircraft out there quickly, pull out the stick, beat everyone to do that with the 737. And that's what we got. If they'd focused on mastery, instead of we've got to beat Airbus, as in we've got an aircraft, a great aircraft, we just need to update it and make it better again. It was the world's leading aircraft in its time, and now we need to make it better. That mastery focus gets them to look internally, not externally, internally, and really focus on what they do. And all the stuff that we're talking about, supporting each other, leadership, dialogue, psychological safety, comes in the teams that we've worked with that really do that well, where they focus internally on how do we get better. And then all the stuff I do now is about measuring how well teams do that internally, how well they're focused on mastery. I don't know whether that resonates with anybody.
Yeah, it reminds me, Brett, of that story about the person working on the cathedral, and they asked each worker what they were doing, and they said they were chipping stone. And they got to the last one, and he said he was building a beautiful cathedral for God. And he was just very happy with his work. And that is one of the biggest problems that we have, is that people don't feel a sense of purpose. They don't have the big picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that kind of goes into Clive's talking about gearing towards care rather than compliance. So Clive, what would you tell somebody in the industry that's been here for, let's just say 10 years, somebody that's a little bit more seasoned? How can they go towards care to kind of pave the way and pave the culture for the next generation?
Yeah, thanks, Linda. And going back to Tim's point also, I think we are moving, but historically it's a leadership thing. Leadership used to be about power, right? It used to be about control. That's what managing and leading are different, I know, but it used to be about power. I think we're all realizing just slowly that the new power is actually influence. And we're moving away from the old finger pointing to actually influence. And Tim, just before I come back to Linda's point, going back to yours, in terms of how do we get away from KPIs more and more into the care focus. Again, Simon Bowen offers that insight in chapter 10, what he did at London Luton Airport. He had to convince his management first up that it was a good idea. He then had to go about getting the trust of senior leaders and his team to actually move away from old KPIs. And they didn't do it all at once. And this is the thing we need to be mindful of. We're talking about incremental change here rather than throwing old safety out or safety one out to replace it with safety two. That's not how it works, and it shouldn't be how it works. Much of what we're currently doing is okay, but we need to actually bring the teams in to do it with us, not us doing it to them. And I think the more, Linda, that we can just start on that, the more we can just start, rather than dictating what a policy is, rather than introducing a system that the teams need to comply to, it'll never be as good. It'll never be as effective as it would be if the team had actually been involved in its construction, in its writing, in its development. The more we can actually bring teams into write, if there are KPIs, have the team got some ownership of them? Do they see the worth in it? People don't really like things being imposed on them and saying, you'll do that now and get a tick in a box. When you've actually taken the time and maybe a little bit of trouble to actually bring them in, they know best anyway. They're the experts. They're the ones who do the job. They're the ones who build the cathedral, to go back to Rosa's point. The more we can start as leaders bringing our teams in, the more they'll have ownership of what they do. If they've got ownership of what they'll do, they're much more likely to use KPIs, tools, processes as they were intended to be used, because they're theirs, they own them. And again, that's just moving away from control, do this, to actually influence. What do we need to do? What does it look like? How will we know when we've completed it? So if nothing else, just this slow drift, if you will, this slow gradual change to bringing our teams into doing as much as we can with them, not to them. And if we do that alone, I was talking with Rosa earlier, it doesn't matter what you call it in a sense, whether you're thinking safety one, safety differently, HOP, whatever it is. If you're doing that, if you are consistently moving towards bringing your team in on most things, you're actually organically moving towards doing safety differently anyway. You don't actually need to call it anything.
Yeah. Well, I almost feel like we need to get together again. Our time is up, right, Tamara? But I do want to say that it's so important to have the right people around you and like-minded and supportive, because, you know, you can get the sense that a lot of leaders don't have humanitarian ideals. That they're not motivated by the same things that we're motivated. And we have to find the language to connect with, because they are human beings, but what is it? What is the language that they will buy into, so that we can work together?
Adult human beings.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Well, and you know, it's interesting. I think we should maybe do another session if people are up to it. That'd be great, because I think we do have a lot more questions for you.
I'd love to do one on Rosa's book too.
Ah, there you go, Rosa. You're next. You're next. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. It's been an amazing session, and thank you very, very much, Clive, for, I know it's early where you are, so thank you so much for putting in that extra effort to join us.
Here's the book, Tim.
Here's the book.
Tim's holding it up. Yeah, thank you, Tim.
And can you share with people where they can get it, please?
Yeah, and Tamara, you wisely asked if there was some way I could get a discount for people, and I've looked into it. Okay, so I'll just give you what I found. So the publisher is Rutledge, or it's Taylor and Francis, CRC Press, but the Rutledge website is where you can actually get it, which is rutledge.com. Now, what I do have is an author's code, and I can get a discount on the books using that code. I don't know. It's when you get to checkout. If you punch this code in, you should get a discount. I think pretty much everybody on the panel's got one anyway, but just in case there's others listening on Facebook and so forth.
Later, yeah.
I'm assuming this code will work for anyone.
No, it does.
And the
I
code,
have a code too that
yeah, great. So the code is capital ADC20, ADC20. If you punch that in at checkout, you will get a discount. Funnily enough, though, I look at the price on the Rutledge site, and even with the discount, it still seems to come out as or more expensive than Amazon. So you might just be best shopping around, guys. But anyway, that is a discount code. You can, as you know, where you can get it, pretty much anywhere. It's on Amazon. It's on all of the sort of ebook retailers. But yeah, it's a discount code, just in case it's interesting. And while you're there, and you would know this, Rosa. They tell us on Amazon these two are frequently bought together.
Yes,
right. I think there's there's a discount if you buy both of them. So hey, just a thought.
Yeah, I tried to figure out where the discount was, but
yeah, it didn't seem like a big discount, but Amazon pair them together. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. This is inspiring.
Can I just say thank you too? I'm not up early at all. I'm usually up at 5, and this was a really respectable time to start. Brett, thank you. A couple of hours earlier there. A couple of people are, traveling. John, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate that. Everybody who's actually chimed in, really appreciate it.
We didn't hear from Tanya or Kevin, but maybe they're...
Kevin, yeah. Kevin's an outstanding leader who seems to attend just about everything we put on. So I appreciate that, Kevin.
Thank you. No, I was running a bit late, so I missed part of it. No, but yeah, there's definitely some good conversation, and you know, in particular, we were talking about values. You know, one of the things I thought was really good was from the book, the All Blacks book on legacy. You know, and there's a value of sweeping the sheds. So no one, despite their number of international caps, are above doing the lowest task.
Nice one. Nice. Thanks, Kevin.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
For organising it tomorrow. And Rosa,
Goodbye is
Yeah.
beginning.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Have a great day, everyone, or a great night if you're going to bed in the States.
Yep.
Thank you.
bye.
Everyone.
Bye now.